That's great. Perfect. Thank you.
Cool. All right. So yeah, this is a data processing tool. So let's go and play around with some data and kind of see what this looks like. Right now, I have a Spark machine set up. It's running actually in Amazon in EC2. Doesn't really matter. You can download Spark for free and run it on your laptop. You don't need Amazon. But I do have it running in Amazon, and I also have some data in Amazon S3, some data sets we're going to play with. And this first one is a set of Amazon reviews. So I'm going to attach my notebook to the uh, actual Spark cluster here. And you can see I've got some output, some folders with data files here in Amazon. And what we want to do is explore this data, right? So we've got a big bunch of Amazon product reviews. We want to take a look. So if you're wondering what's going on in this cell here, what I wrote just above, that's not actually Spark code. If you'll notice it looks very much like sitting on your Mac or your Linux machine and typing an ls, and that's because that's what it is. I'm just running a shell command, and this %sh is a magic tag that runs a shell command on the back-end machine. So far, no Spark, just looking at some files. Let's go run our first Spark query. So I'm going to do a select star from this chunk of data, and I'm going to tell Spark about it by using this notation parquet dot and a backtick and a file path. And that just gives Spark a hint about the file format that we're using here. So we'll talk a little more about that later. But you can see that I went and ran a plain old SQL statement, the same kind you might run with Oracle or MySQL or whatever database you're using. And I get back a little report on the screen. And you can see I've got a number of stars here under the rating column, like a 4-star product review on Amazon. And then I've got the actual full text of the review. So one of the things we do sometimes in our machine learning classes is we'll use this to build a sentiment analysis model. Sentiment analysis is where we try to predict the tone or the sentiment positivity of a review based on, say, the actual words, right? So this is something a lot of companies do to monitor their interaction with their customers and try to improve their kind of customer response. Here we've got just a little bit of a report, and there's some fine print here showing just the first 1,000 rows. Because you might be thinking, well, Spark is about big data. What if I have, a petabyte of data? Am I going to be trying to look at a petabyte in my browser? That's not really going to work. And of course, you're right. So when we look at this in the browser, we're automatically adding a limit operator onto this query so that there's not so much data coming back. Okay, so we can see a little bit of the data, and maybe we want to build some reports or tell some other folks about it, and so we'd like to create a visualization that summarizes this data. And of course, there's lots of ways to do that, but one thing we might want to do is just say, how many positive reviews do we have here? I mean, are people happy with the products? Are they unhappy? What kind of reviews are we getting? And so if we do a query that pulls up the ratings and counts the reviews by rating, we can use a little embedded graphing widget to generate a graphical report. You can see it just takes a click or two to do that. And by using this plot options button, we can even customize this report. Now, this particular graphing widget is part of the Databricks notebook, but all of those open source notebooks that I mentioned are also compatible with open source graphing. So things like Apache Zeppelin has a graphing widget built in that works just like this. So you don't need to pay anything to get access to these kind of capabilities. Another thing you might be wondering is, hey, I'm a data engineer. This notebook thing is cute, but how do I do this, with my actual, from the command line? How do I do this in my scripts? So if you don't have a %SQL magic around in a notebook, the way that API is going to look is we're going to start out by typing Spark, which is an instance of a thing called Spark Session that allows us to talk to, essentially talk to Spark. We're going to go spark.sql, and we're going to give it a SQL string. And if we put a .show on the end of that, you'll see that we get a nice little report here that looks almost like we're running a command line database client. We get a little ASCII art table. And you can see the columns and the data in there. So you can do this without any kind of a notebook. Another thing that you might wonder, whether you're a data engineer or an architect or a team lead, you might say, well, the SQL thing is great for exploring, but I don't want to write my data engineering jobs, or if I'm a lead, I don't want my engineers writing their jobs as a bunch of SQL strings, right? Because there's a lot of things that can go wrong managing libraries of strings. So Spark does have a nice object-oriented API for manipulating these queries. And we're going to look at that in a little bit. But the SQL stuff I wanted to show you because it's really great for interactive analytics. It's easy to get started. You can run your existing SQL or HiveQL reports. So if you have a big investment in HiveQL queries and reporting, like a lot of companies do, you can use those directly with Spark. You don't need Hive. I mean, you can use Hive, but you don't need it there. You can also connect through a JDBC or ODBC reporting tool. So if you have analysts that use something like Tableau to generate reports, and they don't normally ever write code by hand, they can actually talk directly to Spark and generate reports off of your data. And you can do all kinds of nice things linking this stuff together. So before we go any further,